Fantastic. Well, folks, hopefully you are able to hear me. My name is Val Litwin. I'm the president and CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce. We're just going to let a few more attendees come into the room. I see we're already up around 70 and climbing. This is kind of fun. We've got about 300 people confirmed for the webinar today. We're delighted to be sharing the virtual podium with the Honorable Michelle Mungall from the province of British Columbia. So hang tough. We're going to wait about one more minute. We have at least another 100 people dialing in and we'll get going. So thank you for joining us today. Hi, ladies and gents. Val Litwin here from the BC Chamber of Commerce. We've got about another 100 or so people that are dialing in today. So I know we're at 4:01. We're just going to wait one more minute and then we'll get going and introduce our special guest, and looking very much forward to an active conversation with you today with the minister. So hang tough. We're going to get going in about 1 minute. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's BC Chamber hosted town hall with the Honorable Michelle Mungall, who will introduce and welcome to the virtual podium in just a few minutes. I'm Val Litwin. I'm the CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get into our program, I just want to run you through a couple of housekeeping items. I think now many of you are used to Zoom. This has been the new world, digital world we've been introduced to in the last couple of months. But you might not have participated in actually a Zoom webinar. So this is a little bit different than a regular Zoom call. So there's no chat box today, but we will be taking questions. But let's just start with what we think will be the optimal view for you today. Most of you on your screen should have this prompt or a button in the top right corner that says gallery view. If it says gallery view, you'll want to click that and switch to speaker view. We think that's probably the best viewing option for you. But of course, this is your digital environment. Set it up the way you like, but we want you to have the opportunity to see the minister as she's answering some of the questions. And I'll be turning on my camera in a few minutes once I get through our housekeeping items. If you would like to participate in the Q&A, and I hope you will, please click the Q&A option in the dock or menu bar at the bottom or top of your screen. And you'll only see the questions that you've submitted, but I will see them on my side as the moderator. And just a friendly caveat from me, the minister won't be able to answer anywhere near 300 questions, and at least that's how many people registered for today's webinar. So just a little bit of expectation setting. You might submit a question, I might not be able to get to it, but I'll be doing my best as moderator to select questions that seem to capture the mood or the themes of what others are thinking. But let's get to the agenda at hand. And what I'd like to do is start by thanking the almost 300 members we have joining us today from around BC. Our BC Chamber Network is the biggest and broadest business organization in the province with over 36,000 members. And we are the preeminent, thriving, impactful, and pan-provincial network because you all support your local chambers. And your local chambers have been working tirelessly to ensure your voice is heard locally in Victoria and Ottawa. And they've been working around the clock these past 60 days or so during the pandemic. Because we know for most of you, if not all of you on the call today, these past few months have been some of the most challenging and stressful of your business lives. So our local chambers have been stepping up their support, their communications, their advocacy efforts in partnership with us at the BC Chamber and the Canadian Chamber too. And in fact, you may not know this, but your local, provincial, and national chambers have had a hand in many of the government program adjustments that have been made along the way during the pandemic to better serve you. And a big one was moving the federal wage subsidy from 10 to 75% coverage of your payroll. So you may not know, but your chamber network locally, provincially, and again, nationally had a big hand in that. We've been listening closely to your concerns through our bcmindreader.com platform and by staying in close contact with your local chamber executives so we can be a valued partner to government through the crisis in terms of sharing your feedback around programs and supports so all levels of government can respond in a timely fashion. Part of how the BC Chamber, in partnership with local chambers, has been representing you is at the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force table. And the BC Chamber is one of 9 organizations that meets with the Premier, Minister James, and our special guest today, who I'll be introducing, Minister Mungall, every Thursday morning to advocate for you to problem solve and to map out that path to recovery. And I've given myself maybe a nice segue here to introduce our special guest this afternoon. Today, we are joined by the Honourable Michelle Mungall, Minister of Jobs, Economic Development and Competitiveness. In 2002, she was elected to Nelson City Council, notably the youngest person to serve on City Council in Nelson. And Minister, just as an aside, you might not know this, but we actually have some shared Nelson connections. My paternal grandmother was Nelson born and bred, and my favorite coffee shop in the world is Oso Negro, which of course is right in the heart of Nelson. In 2009, the minister was elected as the first woman MLA for Nelson Creston, and then re-elected in 2013 and 2017. Prior to being appointed as the Minister of Jobs, Economic Development and Competitiveness, she was BC's Minister of Energy, Mines and Petroleum Resources. So Minister, allow me, as I hand off the mic to you, to thank you publicly for your leadership on the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force and on your very own Small Business Roundtable. I've had the pleasure of having a front row seat in those settings, and I can see and hear how passionate you are about small business here in BC and how integral they will be to our economic recovery, both in the short and the long term. So again, thank you for joining us today. I know our members are keen to engage with you. And why don't I now turn it over to you, and we can get going with a few questions after you've had a chance to offer some opening remarks if you'd like.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Val. And I'm not going to take up a bunch of time here because I really want to get to the questions. But thank you first, Val, for all the work that you've been doing on behalf of BC businesses and on behalf of chamber members. It's really been wonderful to sit at these various tables with you, whether it's the Recovery Task Force or with our bi-weekly calls with Small Business Roundtable. So many acronyms, so many titles. With the roundtable, it's really wonderful and really important to have your voice representing all of your members be at these tables in these unprecedented times. And that I have a platform, I want to say thank you. Huge, huge thank you to all the business owners out there. It's from my little part of the world here in Townhall territory in my riding of Nelson Creston. I get to see business owners, how seriously they've taken this pandemic, the work that they've done to keep themselves, their employees, their customers, their communities safe has been beyond noteworthy. It has been remarkable. And we're all so grateful. Those of us who aren't small business owners, but we're the patrons. That's me. Nelson is all about small businesses. And for anybody who's ever had the pleasure of being in this wonderful community, or Caslo, or Selma, or Creston, the other communities that I represent, you can see how important small businesses are to our downtown cores. And it's what makes us so special. And to see small business owners in the communities I represent, these are not just people I represent, they're my friends, they're people I care about. And to see what they're going through right now is very sad, it's very challenging, and that they have stepped forward with the primary focus of health and safety has been really incredible. And I think it's a big reason why BC has had the numbers it's had in terms of reducing the spread of COVID-19. And so huge thank you to everybody who's tuning in today and all of your networks we've been able to come out of this curve, and we've been able to flatten it because of the good work that all of you have done.
Well, Minister, thank you for that. It's greatly appreciated, and I can see we have about 200 members from around BC tuning in right now. So you're a popular draw, but we also know this is a really tough time for a lot of entrepreneurs around the province. Again, referring to my sort of opening comments, this is sort of unprecedented in terms of the challenge upon challenge that businesses have been facing in BC. Many are temporarily closed. We know a layer of the economy is permanently closed. And I can already see here in some of the questions that are coming through, lots of clarity being sought around how can I open, where do I go for resources? So this is great. I think we'll have a chance today to create a lot of clarity in the minds of our members here. But maybe right off the top, thinking about the new portfolio you're in a very important position in terms of serving the small business community here in BC. We heard the Premier lay out the reopen plan for BC last week. What are your top priorities and considerations within that plan as the Minister of Jobs, Economic Development and Competitiveness? And maybe that gives us a nice wide lens to zero into a few themes as we have our chat today.
I think I have the same priority that everybody has, which is making sure that we're reducing the spread of COVID-19. So that means health and safety is number one. And I want to put it in this context as well, is that the economy is about people. It's not just spreadsheets, bottom lines, GDPs, and all these things that we do to measure it. At the end of the day, it's about people putting food on the table and having a good, safe, healthy, secure life. And that's what we all want. And we have to make sure that that's what we're going to have. So when we're faced with a global pandemic, we have to make sure that health and safety is number one. And I think everybody agrees with that. And your surveys, polling, word on the street, everybody's saying that their number one concern is reducing the spread of COVID-19. So in terms of restart, the focus has to be on how do we do this safely. And so as we're working with Dr. Bonnie Henry, our provincial health officer, we're working with industry associations, we're working with WorkSafeBC, everything has to run through the lens of health and safety. How do we make sure that as we get back to a new normal, that we're not putting people at risk? And so that is easily said, number one concern. And I would say that everybody in government, Dr. Bonnie Henry has said it numerous times, the Premier said it, everybody has said this numerous times. There are other parts to health and safety than just reducing the spread of this virus. There's mental health, and Val, you've been a really good advocate in terms of making sure that we're taking care of people's mental health in this time frame as well. And with that, the stress that comes with seeing your revenues plummet. Let's be real, right? Like, people are they're worried about their cash flow, they're seeing revenues plummet, and that's scary and that's stressful. And so as we think about the other things that impact our health, mental health, right, and our finances and so on, we have to also keep in mind that we are supporting people as best we can to hold and to make sure that we're reducing the spread of COVID-19 so that we're not increasing that fear in terms of the economic impacts, right? So that we are supporting people in this time. And so as we move from a shutdown to a restart, is making sure that we're still maintaining those supports, not only just for health and safety to reduce the spread, but also making sure that people have the support that they need to reopen, that the stresses are being reduced, and that they're going to be able to see those revenues start to uptick.
So, Minister, you've opened the door on a ton of themes and pathways for us to have some conversations today. So I really appreciate it. I think, maybe tapping into one of the top anxiety pieces up there with obviously profitability. Again, what's involved for me as I open my business and look to recovery. I think most of our members and entrepreneurs are thinking, because they're good citizens, not just great entrepreneurs, they want to open safely. So my team and my customers feel confident, because we know none of this is going to work if we don't create that layer of confidence in there, which starts with health and safety, as you mentioned. And I can see already questions popping up here on my side of the moderator screen. What sort of guidance and direction has the province supplied to date to help create a pathway for businesses to reopen again? And again, we'll get into some more detailed question from some of the members that are posting them here. But what sort of guidance and direction has been supplied to date, and what more should we expect in the next week or two?
So the type of supports that have already been supplied, I'll start first with Small Business BC. And we've funded expanded services with Small Business BC. I know that the CFIB and the Chamber Network has just been doing, and Community Futures have been doing a tremendous job in answering members, any business owners' questions. And we wanted to help with that load, and so we expanded the services at Small Business BC, where you can call and talk to a human, or email with a human, or email or chat with another person at the other end, who can provide you the answers to the questions that you might have as an entrepreneur. And there are multiple languages, 6 days a week, and it's been a tremendous service. The last time I had a chance to speak with Tom about his numbers, he was well over 16,000 supports in terms of talking. They're people talking to entrepreneurs around the province. And so that has been a critical support, because not every business has the same questions. And so we want to make sure that we have people at the other end of the line that can understand those nuances and answer those questions as best they can. The other thing is having guidelines for industries that have stayed open. Now, a lot of other provinces shut more things down. We decided to keep certain sectors of our economy open if they could do so safely. And so we worked with them, and we worked with through WorkSafeBC and our government to make sure that they had very robust guidelines. Those are all available on WorkSafeBC's website, so that they knew what they needed to do to implement safety plans, their COVID-19 safety plans within their businesses. Doing something similar for going forward. And so to date, we've been working with several industry associations and businesses and WorkSafeBC to come up with more guidelines for more industries. So restaurants, for example, we've been working very closely with Ian Tossinson, the Beauticians Association, you name it, we've been working with them. And we will have those guidelines out as soon as we can. We know that we've said that people can start opening up after the May long weekend. And so, as you can imagine, all those industry associations, government, and WorkSafeBC have been working tirelessly to get those supports out there. In the meantime, don't hesitate to contact Small Business BC or check out their website. Very, very good information there.
That's very helpful, Minister. And I have to say, the interface on the Small Business BC website for all the supports, it's beautifully laid out. It's been a huge support, and we've been referring our members to it. Okay, so you know what? I want to actually go to some of the audience questions here, because we're seeing a bit of a theme recurring here. And maybe I'll lead into this question, Minister, by explaining how we've sort of interpreted what the province has put out so far in terms of parameters and guidelines. But really, at the end of the day, in many cases, for these non-essential services that are now coming back into an opening phase, it's up to them to define what their new operating best practice looks like based on the parameters that the province has set out. So I can see a question here. We work in the service industry, completing non-essential service work and installations in customers' homes. So there's the operative piece. I'm going into someone's home. This is an intimate environment. Has there been any direction provided by the government as to what phase that sort of work can resume in? This person is saying, to me, the restart plan is not clear. So will this just be up to how comfortable our customers might be, whether they let us into their homes, with us, of course, taking those proper safety precautions, or is there a specific phase this would fall into? And so, I guess my framing on the question is, what I think we've heard from the province is, hey, contact intensity is a principle, physical distancing, wear a mask. Is it fair to say that businesses after the May long weekend, as long as they're observing those parameters and protocols, they can get back to work?
So we've got a 4-stage restart plan. Phase 1 is where we were at when we announced the restart plan, is because we wanted to acknowledge that we were a bit of ahead of where other provinces were restarting, and so because we had not shut as much down as other provinces had. So right now, looking at mid-May, so after the long weekend, we're looking at phase 2. And so number 1 in phase 2, and I want to just acknowledge this because I know a lot of people out there also have loved ones who had surgery scheduled and saw them canceled. Number 1 thing coming back after mid-May long weekend is surgeries. And so from a small business perspective, though, there's several restaurants, cafes, pubs, hair salons, personal services, retail, in-person counseling, offices, recreation, sports, museums, art galleries, and libraries. That's what's on the list in our plan. The 3rd phase would be further restoration of services under enhanced protocols. So if somebody's wondering what phase they're in and not entirely sure, that's okay. And maybe the best way to solve that is to call WorkSafeBC, because again, the primary function of the restart is doing so slowly in a way that's going to ensure safety and health. And if you have a business that isn't going to be able to meet the protocols necessary at this time for health and safety, so what that is physical distancing. If you're not able to physical distance, you have the proper PPE equipment to do the job necessary, then if you don't have that, you shouldn't be operating. Going into people's homes, that's a judgment call that I'm going to leave with that business owner, because that's a real safety concern. And we have to remember what Dr. Bonnie Henry said, is that if you're going to invite somebody into your home, they have to be within a small network of people that you're doing that with. So I would recommend, if there's probably several other aspects to this question for this particular entrepreneur, I would recommend that they contact WorkSafe, contact Small Business BC, get that specific answer. But the primary thing to always remember is, if you're able to ensure physical distancing and good hygiene and PPEs that are required for you to do that job, then that's the key thing to note.
Great. And Minister, I'll just note for our audience members here, a few people asking for a repeat of that phone number. Folks, we've got a resource slide at the end here, so we'll be able to show that to you. We'll leave it up on the screen. It has all the information there, and we'll make sure we've got, obviously, everyone's email address on this list. We'll send out that slide and that contact information, Minister, after this. So, you know, I can see another theme showing up here, Minister, in the chat room, and it actually fits quite nicely with one of the questions I have for you here. We know you've mentioned it, we're moving cautiously out of crisis mode into a new phase called recovery. We know that there's going to be different supports needed in this reopen recovery process than, I'll call it, crisis survival mode, that hopefully we're starting to come out of. We know many thousands, in fact, of businesses are still very vulnerable. But what relief programs is the province considering to support business on the recovery journey? And I'm thinking now, you know, post announcement from the Premier last Wednesday, they're running the calculation now in their business, right? They're going, okay, twice a day sanitation, maybe I have to purchase PPE for my teams. I maybe have to reconfigure my office, my restaurant. What is being contemplated right now by the province as sort of ongoing support?
So if you recall, when we announced our $5 billion COVID action plan, we put $1.5 billion of that aside for economic recovery. I would say that we're not quite at that recovery stage yet. We're at the restart. So it's about making sure that businesses have the supports they need to start back up again. When it comes to PPE, one of the things that we're talking about internally is making sure that there's an opportunity to get it. It's not you're not out there on your own trying to contact somebody that you know in maybe some other country to ship a bunch of PPE to your small business, right? We need to make sure that we have a centralized hub for PPE. So we're talking about how do we go about doing that that's going to be most efficient to get to businesses all across BC, considering we have a very dispersed geography. It's not an easy geography to navigate, even in summer. I live in the mountains, I can tell you about that. So these are the type of logistics that we're trying to figure out. And in terms of supports, as you know, we've done quite a few deferrals, right? And deferrals well past summer, but into the fall, recognizing that it's going to take time for people to see that revenue increase again. I want to make sure that everybody knows that when the government says we're all in this together, it's not just something that we say, but it's something that we take very seriously. It's a way of being. And so if things don't look good for people following this summer, it's not like you're going to suddenly get a huge bill in the mail and say, too bad. We're all in this together. And so we're constantly monitoring how those deferral programs are working, if they're going to be needed for longer, or however it is that we're going to need to be rolling out supports for our businesses around BC.
Thanks, Minister. A couple of follow-up questions here that I think are germane to this line of discussion here. One is from Patrick. I don't know where Patrick's from, but he says, when restaurants are allowed to open, what are the new rules for tables and servers? And I can maybe preempt this just by saying we had Mark von Schelwitz from Restaurants Canada speaking to some members of our network earlier this week. I know Restaurants Canada is putting out a guideline. I believe the BC RFA, BC Food and Restaurant and Food Service Association is putting out some guidelines. So I know that particular sector has been doing some hard work. Minister, any commentary from you around when restaurants are allowed to open, or is this more a question of, hey, if you can fit those new criteria and you're following the guides from, say, Restaurants Canada as just one example, you should be good to go?
So after the May long weekend is when we said that restaurants, that's when Dr. Bonnie Henry said that restaurants could be the start opening again. You have to meet the guidelines, though. It's not a free-for-all. You have to meet the guidelines. WorkSafeBC inspectors are going to be following up to make sure that that's taking place. And I know that I can't imagine a business who doesn't take that seriously and isn't making every effort even without the Watchful Eye of Workplace BC. Everybody is taking meaningful efforts to reduce the spread of COVID-19, and I'm not surprised that somebody wants to know some of the specifics. I don't want to get into that, and the reason why is that not all of them have been decided on, but also the experts should be giving you the specifics for any questions that entrepreneur would have. And so like I said earlier, and like you mentioned, Val, Ian Tossinson with the Restaurant and Food Service Association has been working very closely with WorkSafeBC, our government, with the PHO on what those guidelines are going to be for restaurants. And once they're available, they will be out for restaurants in terms of getting ready to reopen.
That's great, and I can confirm what you've just said. So thank you for mentioning that again. So to members that are tuning in, the BC RFA and Restaurants Canada would be two great websites to go to, specifically if you're a restaurant, you're a cafe, you're a food service business. If they haven't even rolled out some of their best practice guides already, they will be coming out this week. We have that on confirmation from those two organizations. Minister, you gave me a nice opening, though. You did mention WorkSafeBC, and here's a totally legitimate question. I know lots of entrepreneurs are thinking about this. When the new measures are in place regarding compliance, are there any laws, or are they just strong suggestions? And I'm thinking, obviously it's a non-negotiable, some of these parameters around social distancing, personal protective equipment, but I'm thinking about WorkSafeBC here, going into some of these new work sites that have never operated under these new parameters before. Are they going in as hardcore compliance people? Or are they there to encourage best practices? What should businesses on Main Street be expecting from WorkSafeBC if they show up in the next 30 days after they've opened?
Well, I know that small businesses are going to be taking those guidelines very seriously. And I think we shouldn't just say like, oh, they're guidelines, I don't really have to pay attention to them. No. These guidelines are very serious. They've been vetted by the provincial health officer. Dr. Bonnie Henry's office is working with all of these industry associations to make sure that they are following the best practices and implementing the best practices to reduce the spread of COVID-19. And so I think I can't imagine a business out there who's not going to try and follow those to the very letter. And in terms of WorkSafeBC, they're there to help you follow those to the letter. And that's the role that they're taking on. And because we know that everybody wants to do this, I can't imagine, I can't speak for every WorkSafe officer, but I can't imagine that it's going to be, well, you should have known better on the first go around. Now, if you've gotten warning after warning, WorkSafe might be getting irritated there. But I think it's fair that this is a new space for people, a new way to figure out how to do business. And so everybody's going to be doing their best. And I think that customers are going to be looking for that too.
That's helpful to hear. Minister, it's funny, there's a question coming in here, and I know this was discussed at the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force table, so if you feel you're able to give a high-level answer to this one, or maybe even a progress update, that would be terrific. But the question here from Alistair is, the Premier has highlighted the issues around sick pay and the need to mitigate the risk of employees wanting to work or earn money but being sick and sent home. Is there any update on that front? And I know we heard some encouraging words from the Premier in our meeting last week.
That's right, and we've been working with the federal government to identify how we can support people when they're feeling sick to stay home. We need them to stay home. We don't need financial stress to be a reason why they insist on working. And so we've been working with the federal government on sick pay so that we can make sure that people are supported when we ask them to stay home, that they do.
Yeah, that's a terrific update. I know I can share from a BC Chamber Network perspective, and with some of the other cross-sectoral business associations in BC, Alistair and others that are maybe up at night thinking about this question. We have also sent a letter to the Prime Minister's office saying, hey, look, the solution here, we should be looking at EI or CERB as a pathway for making employees whole, because as the Minister said, I mean, our number one responsibility is the safety of our teams. We have to make sure, we have to enshrine health and safety and make sure people aren't feeling compelled to come to work just to make a living, even if they're sick. So there's no argument from us as a business network, Minister. We need to make our employees whole. We have to look after them if they're in that situation. But business shouldn't be bankrolling a public health crisis, and we think it's national in scope, and totally agree with you and the Premier that this should be considered by Ottawa as a solution to kind of backstop all businesses in Canada. Minister, getting to another question here, and this was on my list. Obviously, as an organization, we're based in the Lower Mainland, but we are completely provincial in scope. In fact, the majority of our members are outside of the Lower Mainland in places like Nelson, BC, and I'll give a little shout out to Tom Thompson, our Executive Director of the Nelson Chamber of Commerce. I assume he's probably on the call, but as a person,
better be.
Yeah, he better be. You can send me an email and confirm you're in the chat room here. But as a person born and bred, well, sorry, maybe not born and bred, but I know you're originally from Alberta, but you've spent a huge part of your life in Nelson. It's a part of who you are. We know rural communities are near and dear to your heart. How is the province approaching recovery and reopen differently between urban and rural communities?
Well, first, Val, it is true that I was born in Alberta, but I've been a Kootenay girl my whole life. It just took me a while to get here. And Tom is somebody I've been speaking to regularly for years, but especially since COVID-19 and all my local chambers. And I think it's really important to always remember what's going on for rural and remote communities and the challenges that just being rural and just being remote has. And one of the things that has really been pronounced with COVID-19 is connectivity, is internet connectivity. As we all shift to doing these types of things online, for a lot of rural communities, having enough bandwidth to just be able to participate with what's going on in the rest of the world is critical. And so that's one of the things that I would say that from a rural and remote community perspective is that as we look at economic recovery, we have to prioritize that rural and remote connectivity, especially in the new world, right? Innovation is always important, but innovation is going to be even more important. And people have already shown how important innovation is, right? Anytime we have to make big changes and adapt very quickly, that's a massive surge of innovation taking place. And from a technological perspective, it's really important for rural and remote communities not to be left behind in the infrastructure required for us to participate. And COVID-19 shown more than ever before that the internet and being connected to the rest of the world is the modern version of electricity in terms of the needed infrastructure to be able to participate. So I would say that is one of the most obvious and most distinct issues for rural and remote communities.
Fantastic. Minister, we know businesses are always thinking about the costs and the matrix they operate in, and how this may impact their margins and their ability to obviously grow and invest in the future. We've had a couple of questions on the EHT, and I know this is something early. The province said, hey, look, we're going to defer payments on the EHT, but there's a question here about maybe that's going to get extended into the future. So the question from Todd is, we know the EHT created dramatic impacts to business. This is my comment now, not the question. We also know we want healthy teams out there. Our businesses rely on healthy workers to grow and make our businesses successful. But the question is, will the province remove requirements for businesses and municipalities to pay this in 2021 to ensure monies earned are reinvested into their businesses and communities? Do you know is there discussions around extending that runway around EHT payment deferrals?
So first, I just want to make sure everybody knows that for businesses with a payroll of $500,000 or less, they don't pay the EHT. It's a lot of small businesses. And we also have to keep in mind that in a healthcare crisis, that's not when you start reducing revenue to the healthcare system. But we have to help small businesses at the same time, and that's why we put the deferral in place. What we're going to be needing in the future as we come out of the summer, we don't know. Nobody knows. Think about 6 months ago, we didn't see any of this coming. And so that's why I said early on that we continue to monitor, and we're not shutting any ideas or any options out the door. The opposition, I think this is really proud of all of us MLAs who normally fight and bicker a lot, if you've ever watched the legislative channel. And we've really all come together and said this is not a time for partisanship. And so the opposition has stepped forward with some ideas, and we're considering those ideas as well.
Minister, that's great. I can see someone actually responded to your comment around rural connectivity. So it's less a question and more a comment. I'll just make sure I give voice to it here. This is from Naomi, actually, at the Chetwynd Chamber. She says, there are many areas in northern BC that are working on satellite internet, which is very expensive, not unlimited and not the most reliable. And she just suggests this should be a priority for us in terms of the rural component during the recovery phase. So just a little shout out there to Naomi, and a consideration for you and the cabinet, perhaps, as we look at what we have to activate to enable recovery in those rural communities. There's another question here at the bottom that I'll get to in a minute, but I want, you have an interesting title in your ministry. We know that when you took over the file, the ministry changed in terms of its name. I was really hoping we'd get the acronym JEDI in there. We were so close. We could have kept innovation and then it would be JEDI for short, but so be it. Competitiveness is important, and we're glad it's in there. But as the Minister of Economic Development, what can you tell us about the provincial approach to economic development at the local level during the recovery phase? So you've talked a little bit about the rural component. That's fantastic. Anything you want to add, just generally speaking, on the economic development side through the lens of your portfolio?
Well, first let me comment. I'm a Star Wars fanatic, and so as soon as I saw the acronym for my new ministry, I immediately sent a text to the other two members of our NDP Geek Caucus, which is the Premier and Bob Deeth, and I made a formal proposal that we switch it to Jobs, Economic Development, and Innovation, competitiveness is important, but I think you know where I was going with this, and so that I could be the minister of the Jedi. That proposal's pending. But on economic development and how do we do it at a local level? Well, I think that I've already been speaking with the Community Futures Development Corporation around the province. For those who aren't in rural BC, Community Futures plays a huge role in economic development throughout the province, as well as our BC Economic Development Association. I've spoken with them as well. And Val, I'm on the phone with you regularly. And all of you play a very important role in that local economic development. And so keeping those networks and those lines of communication and all of us working together as we identify strategies for economic recovery, I think is critical, and building those structures so that we are in continuous conversation. I by no means want to start over-directing, though, what local economic development should look like. Rather, I think it's important to use the structures I already mentioned, but in terms of providing some financial support, use some other structures that we already have. So, for example, we have the Northern Development Initiative Trust, the Southern Interior Development Initiative Trust, we have the Columbia Basin Trust, we have the Nechako-Kitimat Trust, we have oh goodness, I live in an acronym soup, and it's ICE-T for short. It's the Island Community Economic Development Trust. And all of these organizations I've already sat down and had the opportunity to chat with since I became the minister for this portfolio, and continue to have conversations with them in terms of what they're doing to support that economic recovery and support that economic development through the funding and the loans programs that they have.
Fantastic. Minister, we're actually, time has flown by. We're down to our couple of last minutes here, but I'd like to squeeze in one question, then we'll hand the mic over to you to kind of wrap it up. But this one's coming from Carrie Jothan, and I think really this one taps into probably a lot of the anxiety people are feeling out there, because we just know that some businesses and sectors, well, some businesses won't be reopening for sure, but some sectors will be very weakened. You know, tourism is one that we're very concerned about at the BC Chamber, but we've got great people provincially like Ingrid at the BC Hotel Association and Walt Judas at Thai BC working on some solutions there in partnership with us. But right now the question is, do you have plans on how you might redeploy impacted workers who may not have jobs to go back to during the recovery? So a little bit of a labor market realignment question, I think, here. Maybe their employers aren't reopening, or they're having to stay at reduced levels, or maybe the workers are even fearful to return to certain jobs. So great question from Carrie there, but any comments you might make on how we're going to be looking at workforce realignment after this, and how we can tap into that pool of people that want to go back to work but maybe can't quite yet?
Yeah, it's this is a huge challenge with so many people, over 400,000 people who are currently unemployed due to COVID-19 in British Columbia alone. So many people who are waiting for their jobs to come back, and so they're waiting for that phone call to say, come on back to work. And so we will see some of that activity with people going back to work occur over the summer months and into the fall. But what we're finding in a lot of surveys that we're doing in government is that most people, the largest group of people, see their lives not getting back to what was their normal in terms of being able to get back to work and so on for another year. And I imagine that a lot of those people are in the tourism sector, and that's certainly what when I share notes with the Minister for Tourism, Lisa Bear, that's definitely what she's hearing, is that a lot of people are feeling like they're not going to have a job to go back to for quite some time. Being a rural MLA, tourism, it plays a really important role in my riding, and I'm hearing that from a lot of tourism operators as well. So this is a sector that's going to have a lot of displaced workers for quite some time, and where the opportunities are going to be for them. A lot of them have already picked up jobs, seeing that it's going to be a long time before they get back to work. A lot of them already picked up jobs in the retail sector, the grocery retail sector, the Canadian Tire, or so on, that are having that greater demand. Another area that is seeing increase in revenues is the cannabis sector, and so that's a growing sector now with legalization, and so that's posing some more job opportunities for people as well. And some of those job opportunities are transferable skills, so moving into the retail, if you were in maybe in a retail shop, in a gift shop at a hot springs, being able to move from that with that skill set into retail sector of cannabis might be an option as well. So we're looking at all those types of movements of within our labor market, and seeing where reskilling and retraining might be needed, and working with the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Training on those very items. Definitely, there's a lot of flux. There's a lot of shifting going on in our society right now, and I'll just move into wrapping up on that note. Is that with great transition, which is what we're experiencing in an unprecedented level, and we use that word so much, but it's so accurate, things can be really scary. And my heart goes out to small business owners and medium-sized business owners all across the province, because this is a particularly scary time for entrepreneurs who have invested so much into their business, and through no fault of their own are seeing this massive disruption. And my heart goes out to all of them, and know that the Premier, myself, and all of my colleagues around the cabinet table, we're in this with you. We take this very seriously, and we're going to pull through this. We're resilient, we're innovative in British Columbia, and we're in this together. So thank you all so much for tuning in today. Thank you, Val, for giving me the opportunity to connect with your members. I really appreciate it. And for everybody out there, stay safe.
Minister, really appreciate that. Just a final thank you from us. Of course, as BC's biggest and broadest business network, we have 125 local chambers around BC. We're committed and ready to support this government with whatever action is required as we move through reopen and recovery. And, you know, a great final question that we landed on, even just with workforce realignment, regional roundtables, facilitating work at the grassroots level to kind of reorient working teams and opportunities and skills training. We're here to help and support. And I think that you tapped into very generously, and I think intuitively as well, the anxiety people are feeling out there. I can say our members are feeling like the journey is just beginning for them. They're just starting to think about coming out of crisis. So to hear from you that government understands there's a lot of heavy lifting still to do, that there's some listening we can't stop doing with the business community, is a really encouraging thing for us to hear, because again, I know there's lots of anxiety, there's lots of fear out there in the business community. So we appreciate those messages, and really are grateful you were able to join us today. So our commitment, we'll keep working with you. We'll keep listening to our members, taking that intelligence to government and the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force. And we invite you to come back whenever you'd like to engage with our members. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.